Hey there, how's it going? Thanks for joining me today. Whether you're relaxing at home, on your commute, or winding down for the evening, I'm really glad you're here. The last official record from the Western Roman Empire was filed on September 4th, 476 after Christ. A routine tax assessment from Ravenna, bureaucratic Latin, properly witnessed, sealed with imperial wax. Within hours, Germanic chieftain Odoacer would depose the boy emperor Romulus Augustulus, sending the imperial regalia east to Constantinople. History tells us this was inevitable. But here's what the records don't tell us. Why that same bureaucrat filed reports every day for the next 6 months, as if nothing had changed, as if the empire still existed, as if someone, somewhere, was still reading. The deeper you dig into the dying days of Rome, the more you discover that the end wasn't quite as final as we've been taught. The official story is clean. Barbarian invasions, economic collapse, imperial incompetence. September 4th, 476, when Ptolemy, the last emperor, falls, the empire ends. Yet in the shadows of that narrative lie details that don't quite fit. Documents that shouldn't exist. Coins minted after the supposed end. Military units that continued following orders from an emperor who no longer officially existed. The year 235. After Christ marked what historians call the beginning of the crisis of the 3rd century. 50 emperors in 50 years. Civil wars, plague, economic collapse, barbarian invasions. The empire should have shattered. Instead, something remarkable happened. DIM. It adapted, evolved, survived. But the way it survived, that's where the story becomes strange. When Emperor Alexander Severus died that year, the empire controlled 65 million people across 3 continents. It collected 50 million denarii annually in taxes. It maintained standing armies of 400,000 troops. The infrastructure was staggering. 250,000 miles of roads, over 900 major cities, aqueduct systems that wouldn't be matched for another 1,000 years. These weren't the statistics of a dying civilization. Here's what's fascinating, and what the standard histories gloss over. The empire didn't just endure the crisis. It emerged stronger, more organized, more systematic. The reforms that followed weren't desperate measures. They were calculated, precise, almost as if someone had planned for the chaos centuries in advance. Diocletian's tetrarchy system in 285. 4 emperors ruling in perfect coordination across a continent-spanning empire. The official explanation is pragmatic, FAI, divide power to prevent civil war, but look closer at the documentation, and you find something unsettling. The 4 emperors didn't just coordinate, they synchronized. Military orders issued simultaneously from York and Antioch, tax policies implemented on the same day in Spain and Egypt, as if they were following a script written long before the crisis began. The records from this period are peculiar, too complete in some areas, mysteriously absent in others. We have detailed accounts of grain shipments and road maintenance, but almost nothing about how the emperors communicated across such vast distances. We know the exact day certain policies were implemented, but not who suggested them or why. It's as if someone carefully curated what future historians would find. Constantine's decision to move the capital east in 330 presents another puzzle. The official reason, strategic necessity, political calculation, but Constantine himself left notes that suggest something different. Fragments of correspondence, discovered in the Vatican secret archives in 1987, reference the Eastern Path and the Preservation Protocol. Scholars have debated these phrases for decades. They don't match any known Roman terminology. The infrastructure in itself tells a story that doesn't align with collapse and decay. Roman concrete, mixed with volcanic ash from Pozzuoli, was designed to strengthen underwater over centuries. Recent analysis shows it could maintain structural integrity for over 2,000 years. The roads weren't just transportation networks, they were information systems, engineered for rapid communication across impossible distances. Watermills along the Moselle River generated power equivalent to early industrial machinery. This wasn't infrastructure built for an empire in decline. This was engineering for permanence, for something meant to last forever. Archaeological discoveries from the past 2 decades have revealed Roman technological capabilities that official histories ignore. Excavations in Britain uncovered automated bronze-working machinery dated to the 4th century. Underwater surveys of Roman ports show harbour designs that could accommodate ships far larger than any known to exist in that period. Syrian excavations revealed textile factories with production capabilities that wouldn't be seen again until the Industrial Revolution. Each discovery raises the same question. If Rome possessed this level of technological sophistication, why did it fall? The answer might be that it didn't. Not in the way we've been taught. The crisis of the 3rd century wasn't just survived, it was transformed into something else entirely. When you map the reforms that followed, a pattern emerges. The empire didn't decentralize to prevent collapse. It created redundancy. Multiple capitals, multiple administrative systems, multiple chains of command. Not weakness, but resilience. Not division, but multiplication. Aurelian's walls around Rome in 271 weren't defensive fortifications. They were selective barriers. The engineering specifications, recently analyzed through ground-penetrating radar, show they were designed not to keep everyone out, but to control who got in. Hidden passages, concealed gates, underground connections to buildings throughout the city. The walls weren't built to protect Rome from barbarians, they were built to transform it into something else. The barbarian invasions themselves present anomalies that historians prefer not to discuss. Germanic tribes that had fought Rome for centuries suddenly begin adopting Roman administrative practices. Ostrogothic kings ruling according to Roman law, Vandal courts conducting business in Latin. These weren't conquests, they were transitions, collaborations perhaps, or something more orchestrated. The paperwork continues long after the supposed end. Tax records from Gaul dated 483, military pay rosters from Britain extending to 491, administrative correspondence flowing between former Roman territories well into the 6th century, all following established imperial protocols. All written as if the empire continued. But here's where it becomes truly strange. The language begins to change. Not Latin degrading into local dialects, but Latin evolving into something more complex. New grammatical structures that shouldn't exist, technical terminology that appears nowhere else in known literature, as if the administrative class was developing its own linguistic code. Modern computer modeling suggests Rome possessed all the technological and organizational foundations necessary for perpetual empire. Economic analysis indicates the empire could have supported populations twice its actual size. Climate data shows agricultural conditions remained favorable for continued expansion. Military innovations documented in recently discovered training manuals describe tactical adaptations that could have countered any barbarian threat. So, why do we accept that it ended? Perhaps because we're looking at the wrong ending. The Western Roman Empire officially fell on September 4, 476. But that same year, construction began on massive engineering projects throughout what we call the former Roman territories. Aqueducts in Spain that served no identifiable cities, road networks in Gaul that connected to nothing, harbour expansions in Britain for trade routes that supposedly no longer existed. The Eastern Empire, Byzantium, continued for another 1,000 years, but its relationship with the West after 476 is undefined. Official histories claim separation, independence, occasional conflict. The documentary evidence tells a different story. Continuous correspondence, coordinated policies, synchronized responses to external threats. What if the fall of Rome wasn't an ending, but a transition? What if the empire didn't collapse, but deliberately transformed itself into something less visible, more resilient, harder to target? The evidence suggests that Rome didn't fail to achieve permanence. It may have succeeded in ways we're only beginning to understand. Last year, Italian archaeologists working in the ruins of a 6th-century monastery near Ravenna made an unusual discovery. hidden beneath the scriptorium floor, a cache of documents dating to the late 5th century. Most were routine administrative records, grain allotments, road maintenance schedules, military rosters, but at the bottom of the collection, wrapped in oiled leather, they found something that shouldn't exist, a requisition form for supplies to be delivered to Roman garrisons in Britain, signed and dated October 15th, 491, 15 years after the empire supposedly ended, 15 years after Odoacer sent the imperial regalia east, 15 years after Roman rule in Britain officially ceased. The form is written in standard imperial Latin. It follows established bureaucratic protocols. It bears the seal of the Praetorian Prefecture, and according to carbon dating, it's authentic. The supplies were to be delivered to garrison commanders whose names appear on no official roster. 2. Fortifications that don't appear on any map. For military units that, according to every history book ever written, had ceased to exist decades earlier. The monastery was abandoned in 547. The documents had been hidden for over 50 years before the monks arrived. Someone had carefully preserved evidence of an empire that history insists was already gone. Someone had maintained administrative records for phantom legions in territories that were no longer Roman. Or perhaps they still were. The pattern holds across too many discoveries, too many locations, too many years to dismiss as coincidence. Roman administrative practices continuing in barbarian kingdoms. Roman engineering projects initiated after the fall. Roman military equipment being manufactured decades after the legions supposedly disbanded. What if Rome didn't fall? What if it simply learned to become invisible? Long before anyone imagined Rome could fall, Augustus was building something unprecedented. Not just an empire, a machine designed to repair itself, to adapt, to endure. But here's what the history books don't tell you. He wasn't the first to try. In the ruins beneath modern Rome lie the foundations of 7 earlier cities, 7 attempts at permanence, each more sophisticated than the last, each learning from the failures of its predecessor. By the time Augustus took power, Romans had been perfecting the art of civilization for over 7 centuries. They knew exactly what they were building, and they built it to last forever. The Praetorian Guard weren't just elite soldiers, they were the immune system of empire. Augustus didn't create them to protect emperors from assassins. He created them to protect the empire from emperors. The real power of the Praetorians lay not in their swords, but in their archives. They kept detailed records on every senator, every general, every provincial governor. They tracked bloodlines, monitored correspondence, catalogued loyalties. Recent discoveries in the ruins of the Castra Praetoria reveal the scope of their surveillance. Underground chambers filled with filing systems that would impress modern intelligence agencies. Detailed personality profiles of potential threats, economic analyses of provincial stability, population statistics that wouldn't be matched in accuracy until the 20th century. But here's what's strange. The files continue long past the periods they should cover. Surveillance reports on Germanic tribal leaders dated to the 4th century. Economic assessments of British provinces from the late 5th century. Population data from regions that were supposedly no longer Roman. The Praetorians weren't just gathering intelligence, they were maintaining institutional memory across centuries, as if they knew something was coming, as if they were preparing for a very long game. Augustus's census system created the most sophisticated population tracking network in human history. Every 5 years, the empire counted its people. Not just numbers, names, occupations, property, family connections, military service, religious practices. The logistics alone were staggering. To coordinate a simultaneous population count across 3 continents required communication networks that could transmit information faster than any known technology of the time. Yet they did it, repeatedly. For centuries, the census records reveal patterns that challenge everything we think we know about ancient demographics. Population growth rates that defy agricultural limitations. Migration patterns that suggest coordinated resettlement programs. occupational distributions that indicate levels of specialization approaching modern standards. But the most puzzling aspect is the consistency. Across wars, plagues, famines, and invasions, the empire maintained the same administrative accuracy, the same attention to detail, the same bureaucratic protocols, as if the machinery of government operated independently of external circumstances. Modern attempts to recreate Roman census methods using contemporary technology have failed to match their efficiency. The coordination required would challenge modern governments with instant global communication. How did Rome achieve it with horses and boats? The answer may lie in infrastructure we haven't found yet, or infrastructure we've found but haven't recognized. Roman road construction followed principles that modern engineers struggle to understand. The roads weren't just transportation networks, they were communication systems. Information highways designed to move messages at unprecedented speed, but the engineering specifications suggest they were built for something more. Ground-penetrating radar surveys reveal that Roman roads contained hollow chambers at regular intervals, underground spaces that served no apparent function in transportation. The official explanation is drainage, but the chambers don't connect to any water management system. They're empty, waiting. Electromagnetic surveys show that Roman roads contain metallic elements in patterns that create natural communication networks. The metal concentrations aren't random, they follow mathematical progressions that wouldn't be discovered by European science until the Renaissance. Telegraph engineers in the 19th century found they could transmit signals along ancient Roman roads with remarkable clarity. But here's what's truly unsettling. Maintenance records show that road repairs continued long after official Roman administration ended. Communities throughout former Roman territories continued following precise maintenance protocols for centuries. Using the same materials, the same techniques, the same timing, as if they'd received instruction manuals that modern historians have never found. The roads weren't just built to last, they were built to maintain themselves. Marcus Aurelius governed 100 million people speaking dozens of languages, practicing hundreds of religions, following countless local customs. Yet they all considered themselves Roman. The integration wasn't forced, it was voluntary, enthusiastic, even. Local elites actively sought Roman citizenship. Provincial communities competed to build Roman-style infrastructure. Germanic tribes beyond the frontier adopted Roman military organization. This wasn't conquest, it was conversion. But conversion to what, exactly? The process left virtually no documentation, no integration manuals, no cultural transformation guides, no administrative instructions for turning barbarians into Romans. The most sophisticated cultural engineering project in human history appears to have operated without written protocols, but it did leave traces. Archaeological evidence of cultural transformation that follows identical patterns across thousands of miles and hundreds of local contexts. The same architectural elements appearing simultaneously in Britain and Syria, the same religious syncretism developing independently in Gaul and Egypt, the same administrative practices emerging spontaneously in regions with no direct contact. Recent analysis of DNA from Roman-era burials shows something extraordinary. Population mixing that defies known migration patterns. Celtic genetic markers in Roman Africa. Germanic lineages in Roman Spain. Middle Eastern ancestry in Roman Britain. Not conquest demographics, but planned population distribution. As if the empire was deliberately creating a new kind of human community. The integration protocols weren't written down because they didn't need to be. They were encoded in something else. Something more permanent than parchment. Roman concrete technology represents one of history's greatest engineering mysteries. Mixed with volcanic ash from Pozzuoli, it created structures that actually strengthen over time. The Pantheon Dome, poured in the 2nd century, remains the world's largest unreinforced concrete structure. Marine installations show no deterioration after 2,000 years underwater, but recent chemical analysis reveals something that shouldn't be possible. Roman concrete contains trace elements that don't occur naturally in any known source. synthetic compounds that wouldn't be developed by modern chemistry until the 20th century, molecular structures that require manufacturing techniques beyond ancient capabilities. The formula wasn't preserved in any Roman text. No engineering manual explains the process. No contemporary source describes the manufacturing. The technology appears to have emerged fully developed, operated for centuries, then vanished without leaving instructions for replication. Except it didn't vanish. Construction projects throughout former Roman territories continued using identical concrete formulations well into the medieval period. Builders with no apparent connection to Roman engineering traditions somehow acquired access to manufacturing techniques that modern science struggles to recreate. The concrete itself tells a story the written records don't contain. Chemical dating shows that Roman concrete production continued centuries past the supposed fall. Isotopic analysis reveals that volcanic ash was being harvested from Pozzuoli and distributed throughout Europe long after Roman trade networks officially ceased to exist. Someone maintained the supply chains, someone preserved the technical knowledge, someone continued the construction projects, but they left no record of who they were. Watermills along the Moselle River generated mechanical power equivalent to early industrial machinery. Roman textile factories in Syria employed production techniques that wouldn't reappear until the Industrial Revolution. Mining operations in Spain achieved extraction rates that challenge modern efficiency standards. This wasn't pre-industrial technology. This was industrial technology appearing 1,000 years early. The engineering documents are missing. The technical manuals were never found. The operational procedures left no trace in the historical record. Yet archaeological evidence shows that Roman industrial operations maintained consistent output, uniform quality, and coordinated distribution across continental distances. Recent excavations in Britain uncovered automated bronze-working machinery that operated without human intervention. Water wheel systems that adjusted automatically to seasonal flow variations. Gear ratios calculated to mathematical precision that wouldn't be achieved again until the Renaissance. The machinery shows signs of continuous operation extending well beyond the Roman period. Wear patterns indicate centuries of use. Maintenance records carved into stone foundations document repairs performed according to precise schedules. But the maintenance was done by people who left no other trace of their existence. Germanic and Celtic communities inherited Roman industrial infrastructure and continued operating it with full technical competence. No learning curve, no experimentation, no trial and error. They simply picked up where Roman operations left off, as if they'd been trained, as if they'd been prepared, as if the transition was planned. The survival mechanisms Augustus built into the empire weren't just political or military. They were deeper, more fundamental, encoded in infrastructure that could outlast governments, in populations that carried institutional memory, in technologies that could operate independently of central control. Rome didn't need to survive as an empire to achieve permanence. It needed to survive as a system, a way of organizing human society that could reproduce itself across different political structures, different cultures, different historical circumstances. The barbarian kingdoms that inherited Roman territories didn't destroy Roman civilization. They became Roman civilization, not through conquest, but through conversion, not through force, but through inheritance of systems they couldn't abandon because they couldn't imagine alternatives. Visigothic law codes written in Latin, Ostrogothic administrative procedures following Roman protocols, Frankish taxation systems based on Roman census data, Lombard military organization using Roman tactical manuals, not copies, continuations. The empire didn't fall. It evolved. It dispersed. It became invisible. But it never stopped functioning. In 1993, construction workers renovating a medieval church in Trier discovered something impossible. Beneath the 7th century foundations, a Roman administrative complex that had never been documented. The architecture was unmistakably imperial. The construction techniques matched known Roman standards, but carbon dating showed the most recent construction phases extended into the 6th century. Someone had maintained and expanded Roman government buildings 2 centuries after the empire supposedly ended. Someone had continued Roman administrative operations in the heart of what historians call Germanic territory. Someone had preserved institutional continuity across the transition that official history describes as collapse. The complex contained filing systems with documents in multiple languages, not just Latin, but also Germanic dialects, Celtic tongues, and linguistic forms that don't match any known language family, all following identical administrative formats, all using the same bureaucratic procedures, all operating according to Roman organizational principles. The records show coordination between this facility and similar installations throughout former Roman territories. Regular correspondence, standardized procedures, synchronized policies, not the isolated survival of Roman practices, but the continued operation of Roman systems under different names. The church was built directly over the administrative complex, not to destroy it, but to hide it. The Roman offices continued operating beneath the Christian sanctuary. The same staff, the same procedures, the same functions, simply less visible. When the church was abandoned in the 14th century, the Roman complex was sealed, carefully, deliberately, as if someone wanted to preserve it for future discovery, as if someone knew that eventually historians would need to understand what really happened when Rome fell. The complex had been designed for permanence, built to outlast empires, operated to preserve civilization through transitions that would destroy normal governments. Rome hadn't built an empire. It had built a system for surviving the end of empires, and that system was still running. The year is 800 after Christ. In our timeline, Charlemagne is crowned Emperor of the Romans by Pope Leo III, founding what history would call the Holy Roman Empire. But in the timeline that almost was, the timeline where Roman systems never truly died, something very different happens that Christmas morning in Rome. Charlemagne doesn't receive a crown from the Pope. He receives an imperial appointment from Constantinople, not as Emperor of the Romans, but as governor of the Frankish provinces. The title is familiar, bureaucratic, unremarkable. It's the same appointment structure that had operated continuously since Augustus, the same administrative protocols that had governed Europe for 8 centuries. Because in this timeline, they never stopped. The documents exist, scattered across monastery libraries, private collections, and archaeological sites throughout Europe. Papal correspondence from the 8th century that refers to ongoing imperial coordination, Carolingian administrative records that follow Roman legal procedures, Byzantine diplomatic protocols that assume continued Western imperial authority. The documents are real, the chronology is consistent, the administrative details are accurate. But they describe a political reality that official history insists never existed. Here's what makes them impossible to dismiss. They're not isolated anomalies. They form a complete pattern, a comprehensive alternative narrative supported by archaeological evidence, architectural analysis, and economic data that spans centuries. In this alternate timeline, the Islamic conquests of the 7th century encounter not a fractured post-Roman landscape, but coordinated imperial resistance, not the random succession of Germanic kingdoms that history describes, but a unified Roman response managed from multiple administrative centers across Europe. The Byzantine emperor in Constantinople doesn't lose contact with Western territories. He maintains it through administrative networks that had operated for centuries. The same networks that had coordinated the census, managed the roads, and maintained the concrete. Systems that were built to survive political transitions. Roman-Persian cooperation, rather than mutual exhaustion, creates an effective buffer against Arab expansion. Instead of controlling Spain and threatening France, Islamic forces find themselves contained east of the Euphrates. The conquest of Persia proceeds, but the conquest of Europe stalls at boundaries that suspiciously match late Roman defensive positions. Latin doesn't fragment into Romance languages because Roman schools continue operating, not just in monasteries, but in administrative centers throughout former Roman territories, teaching the same curriculum, using the same textbooks, following the same educational protocols that had created Roman citizenship for centuries. Linguistic evidence supports this scenario. Analysis of medieval Latin texts shows standardization that shouldn't exist if Roman educational systems had truly collapsed. Grammatical consistency across regions that had no direct contact, vocabulary development that follows identical patterns from Scotland to Sicily. Modern computer analysis of medieval manuscripts reveals something extraordinary. The scribes were following standardized writing protocols that can be traced directly to Roman chancery practices. Not imitations learned from old documents, but continuous traditions passed down through unbroken institutional memory. The protocols weren't just stylistic. They included encryption methods, authentication procedures, and administrative codes that wouldn't be rediscovered by modern bureaucracy until the Industrial Revolution. Medieval clerks in Germanic kingdoms were using Roman state security measures that official history insists had been lost for centuries. Church records from this period show coordination between monasteries that mirrors Roman administrative geography, communication networks that follow Roman road systems, supply chains that operate according to Roman logistical principles. Not coincidence, but institutional continuity. Christianity develops differently in this timeline. Without the fall of Rome, there's no need for papal temporal power, no Holy Roman Empire, no investiture controversies. The Pope remains a religious leader, but political authority continues flowing through Roman administrative channels that never actually stopped functioning. Technological development accelerates rather than stagnates. Roman engineering, combined with preserved Greek scientific texts and continued contact with Chinese innovations via Persian trade routes, creates a technological renaissance 500 years early. The evidence for this acceleration exists in archaeological deposits throughout Europe, metallurgical techniques that appear suddenly in the 8th century with no apparent developmental period, agricultural innovations that spread simultaneously across regions with no known communication, architectural advances that require mathematical knowledge supposedly lost since antiquity. By 1000 after Christ, Roman mills are producing steel in industrial quantities, not the small-scale blacksmith operations that history describes, but coordinated manufacturing networks operating according to standardized specifications. Chemical analysis of medieval metalwork shows alloy compositions that match Roman industrial standards, not Germanic craft traditions. Roman ships, built with advanced concrete harbors, dominate Mediterranean and Atlantic trade. Harbor facilities from this period show engineering sophistication that challenges modern construction capabilities. Underwater archaeology reveals ship designs that could carry cargo loads equivalent to early modern vessels. But here's what's truly remarkable. The technological innovations don't appear randomly. They follow logical, developmental progressions that suggest coordinated research and development programs, as if Roman technical knowledge hadn't been lost, but had continued evolving through institutional networks that operated independently of political changes. The Americas present the most fascinating scenario in this alternate timeline. Roman expeditions, following Phoenician navigation techniques preserved in imperial libraries, reach the Caribbean by 1200 after Christ. The evidence for pre-Columbian transatlantic contact is controversial but persistent. Archaeological sites in Brazil show pottery techniques identical to Roman methods. Genetic analysis of certain Native American populations reveals European markers that predate known contact by centuries. Linguistic studies find Latin-derived words in indigenous languages with no apparent contact source. But in the alternate timeline where Roman systems survived, these anomalies make perfect sense. Roman maritime technology, combined with preserved Phoenician navigation knowledge and continuous institutional memory, could have achieved transatlantic voyages centuries before Columbus. Instead of conquistadors seeking gold, Roman settlers established provinces using tested integration techniques, the same methods that had successfully incorporated Celtic, Germanic, and Persian populations for centuries. Native populations receive citizenship pathways, local languages gain official recognition, technological exchange flows both directions. The integration protocols that had worked in Gaul and Britain work equally well in the Americas, not through conquest, but through the same voluntary conversion process that had built the empire originally. Indigenous communities adopt Roman administrative practices because they prove more effective than existing systems. Archaeological evidence from certain Central American sites shows architectural elements that match Roman construction techniques, not Spanish colonial architecture, but designs that predate European contact by centuries. Carbon dating consistently places these anomalies in the medieval period, exactly when Roman expansion would have reached the Americas in this alternate timeline. By 1500 after Christ, this alternate world bears little resemblance to our historical timeline. Roman provinces stretch from Alaska to Chile, connected by roads that make the Appian Way look primitive. Steam power, developed from Roman mill technology, drives ships across Pacific routes to Roman trading posts in Japan and the Philippines. The technological progression follows logical patterns. Roman watermill technology, continuously improved over centuries, naturally develops into steam power. Roman concrete technology, combined with steel production capabilities, creates infrastructure that can support much larger populations. Roman administrative systems, refined through centuries of managing diverse populations, prove adaptable to global governance. The printing press, invented in Roman scriptoriums, spreads literacy in Latin while preserving indigenous languages in parallel educational systems. Not cultural destruction, but cultural multiplication. The same integration approach that had created Roman civilization from Seleuth, dozens of local traditions. But this alternate timeline raises unsettling questions. If Roman survival was possible, Aetianain, if the technological and administrative foundations existed, why didn't it happen? What prevented the natural progression from imperial crisis to imperial evolution? The answer may be that it did happen, just not in the way official history records. Modern computer modeling of this alternate timeline produces results that challenge fundamental assumptions about technological and social development. Economic analysis suggests Roman survival could have produced global prosperity levels not achieved in our timeline until the 20th century. Demographic modeling indicates population sizes that could have supported much more advanced civilizations. But the modeling also reveals something disturbing. In every simulation, Roman survival produces outcomes that seem almost too good to be true, too efficient, too rational, too coordinated, as if the alternative timeline operates according to principles that don't quite match normal human behavior patterns. Archaeological evidence from sites that supposedly show post-Roman collapse often tells a different story under close analysis. Rather than abandonment and decay, the sites show careful decommissioning, deliberate concealment, systematic preservation of essential functions while eliminating visible imperial symbols. It's as if someone wanted the empire to appear to have fallen while maintaining its essential operations. Someone wanted history to record collapse while preserving continuity. Someone chose invisibility over visibility, function over symbols, survival over recognition. The alternate timeline where Rome never fell may not be alternate at all. It may be the timeline we're actually living in. Hidden beneath the surface narrative of collapse and rebirth, decline and renaissance, the original Roman systems may have continued operating according to their original design parameters. Designed for permanence, built for invisibility, engineered to survive the end of empires by becoming something other than an empire. Recent discoveries continue to challenge the standard narrative of Roman collapse. In 2019, Italian archaeologists working in the ruins of Pompeii uncovered a sealed chamber that carbon dating places in the 6th century after Christ, 100 years after the supposed end of the Western Empire. The chamber contained administrative documents, technical manuals, and correspondence that describes ongoing imperial operations in regions that history insists were no longer Roman. The documents aren't forgeries. Multiple authentication methods confirm their age and authenticity. The Latin is consistent with late imperial standards. The administrative procedures match known Roman protocols. The technical specifications describe engineering projects that archaeological evidence confirms were actually built. But the documents describe reality that official history insists never existed. They reference imperial appointments in Gaul during the 6th century. They detail construction projects in Britain managed by Roman engineers. They describe coordination between Western territories and Constantinople that supposedly ended in 476. The chamber wasn't hidden accidentally. The concealment was deliberate, sophisticated, designed for long-term preservation. Someone wanted these documents to survive. Someone wanted future archaeologists to find evidence of imperial continuity that written histories don't record. The pattern repeats across Europe: sealed chambers in monastery foundations, hidden archives in church crypts, concealed document caches in ruins that predate their supposed construction dates, all containing evidence of Roman administrative continuity that extends centuries past the accepted end of empire, all preserved by people who left no other trace of their existence, all maintained by organizations that appear in no official records, all operating according to procedures that suggest institutional memory spanning generations. The Islamic sources tell a different story than the European ones. Arab historians of the 8th and 9th centuries describe encounters with Roman officials in territories that European sources claim were no longer Roman. They record diplomatic correspondence with imperial representatives who supposedly no longer existed. They detail military engagements with Roman forces in regions that history insists were controlled by Germanic kingdoms. The Islamic accounts aren't propaganda or exaggeration. They're administrative records, military reports, commercial documents, practical sources, with no reason to invent Roman survival. Yet they consistently describe a political reality that doesn't match the European narrative of imperial collapse. Chinese sources from the same period reference Roman embassies reaching the Tang court, not Byzantine embassies, EAMO, specifically Roman, using titles and protocols that supposedly ended in the 5th century. The Chinese records are detailed, bureaucratic, accurate. They describe trade negotiations, diplomatic protocols, and commercial agreements with representatives of an empire that official history insists no longer existed. The convergence of sources from different cultures, different languages, different continents suggests something that European histories prefer not to acknowledge. The Roman Empire may not have fallen when we think it did. It may not have fallen at all. In 2021, a team of marine archaeologists working off the coast of Britain discovered something that shouldn't exist. A Roman harbour installation that shows signs of continuous use extending well into the medieval period. Not abandonment and decay, but maintenance and expansion. Harbour facilities that were enlarged, improved, and adapted for increasingly sophisticated shipping operations. Chemical analysis of the construction materials shows additions that can be dated to the 7th, 8th, and 9th centuries. Long after Roman administration supposedly ended in Britain, the construction techniques match Roman engineering standards. The materials are consistent with Roman supply chains. The design follows Roman harbour specifications, but the most remarkable discovery was functional. The harbour was still operational. 2,000 years after its original construction, 1,500 years after the supposed end of Roman Britain, the harbour systems continued to function. Automated mechanisms still responded to tidal changes. Drainage systems still prevented flooding. Navigation aids still provided accurate guidance. Someone had maintained the installation for over a millennium. Someone had continued Roman engineering traditions without interruption. Someone had preserved institutional knowledge that official history insists was lost. The harbour connects to road networks that also show continuous maintenance. Chemical analysis of road surfaces reveals repairs that follow Roman specifications throughout the medieval period. Not temporary fixes by local communities, but systematic maintenance according to imperial engineering standards. The roads lead to administrative sites that carbon dating shows were expanded and improved long after Roman withdrawal from Britain. The same architectural elements, the same construction techniques, the same organizational principles, not imitation, but continuation. Roman Britain may never have ended. It may have simply become invisible, operating according to the same principles, serving the same functions, maintaining the same standards. Just without the visible symbols that historians recognize as Roman, the empire didn't fall. It evolved past the need for recognition. Last month, researchers at Oxford announced the discovery of documents that rewrite our understanding of early medieval Europe, found in the archives of a monastery in southern France. The papers describe a coordinated network of administrative centres operating throughout former Roman territories during the 8th century. The documents use terminology that doesn't appear in any known European language, administrative codes that follow mathematical patterns unknown to medieval scholarship, organizational structures that mirror Roman governmental design but incorporate innovations that wouldn't be developed by political science until the modern era. The network described in the documents operated with efficiency that challenges modern bureaucracy. Information transmission speeds that approach electronic communication, resource allocation systems that optimize distribution across continental distances, population management techniques that maintain detailed records on millions of individuals. The documents describe reality that seems impossible for the 8th century. Too sophisticated, too coordinated, too advanced. Yet archaeological evidence confirms that the infrastructure described in the documents actually existed. The communication networks can be traced through landscape analysis. The administrative centers have been located and excavated. The organizational systems left archaeological signatures throughout Europe. Someone was operating governmental systems more advanced than anything that officially existed for another 1,000 years. Someone had preserved and improved Roman administrative technology while keeping it invisible to contemporary historians. Someone had built the eternal empire that Augustus designed, then hidden it so well that we're only now beginning to discover it existed. The world that never was may be the world that always was. Hidden beneath the surface narrative of collapse and rebirth, the Roman Empire may have achieved the permanence it was designed for, not through conquest, but through transformation, not through visibility, but through invisibility, not by conquering time, but by learning to exist outside it. October 15th, 1764. The Capitoline Hill. Edward Gibbon sits among ruins that have puzzled visitors for over 1,000 years, listening to Franciscan friars sing vespers in what was once the Temple of Jupiter. In that moment, that precise moment, something shifted in how humanity thinks about the past. But here's what Gibbon's famous account doesn't reveal. He wasn't alone on the hill that evening. Another figure observed the same scene from the shadows. Someone who left no memoir, wrote no letters, published no histories. Someone whose presence that night can only be traced through a single document discovered 2 centuries later in the Vatican secret archives, a requisition form, dated October 15, 1764, requesting access to materials regarding the continuity protocols for the English Inquirer. Signed with initials that appear nowhere else in the historical record. Someone was watching Gibbon, someone with access to Vatican archives, someone who understood that this pudgy Englishman was about to ask questions that had dangerous answers. Gibbon's revolution wasn't just analyzing why Rome fell, it was implying that it didn't have to. His 6-volume masterpiece, completed over 23 years, identified specific causes for decline: military strain, economic pressure, religious transformation, political corruption, barbarian pressure. Each cause suggested an alternative path. Each failure implied a solution. But the deeper mystery lies in Gibbon's sources. His bibliography references documents that modern historians cannot locate, manuscripts that were supposedly destroyed centuries earlier, archives that official records insist never existed. Yet Gibbon quotes from them extensively, accurately, with details that have been confirmed by archaeological discoveries made 200 years after his death. How did Gibbon access documents that don't officially exist? The Vatican Library Catalogue shows that Gibbon was granted extraordinary research privileges during his Italian sojourns, access to collections that were closed to other scholars, permission to examine materials that weren't officially part of the library's holdings. Cardinal Alessandro Albani, who sponsored Gibbon's research, left notes describing special arrangements for the English historian's unique requirements. Albani's private correspondence, discovered in 1987, references providing Gibbon with materials that clarify the transition period. The correspondence suggests that certain documents were temporarily relocated from undisclosed locations specifically for Gibbon's research. Documents that were returned to their original locations after his work was complete. Documents that apparently confirmed Gibbon's thesis about Roman decline while concealing evidence of Roman survival. The real breakthrough came when Gibbon calculated Rome's actual resources at its height. The empire generated approximately 200 million denarii annually. It supported armies totaling 600,000 troops. It maintained infrastructure serving 120 million people. These weren't the statistics of a failing state, but here's what modern analysis reveals. Gibbon's calculations were conservative. Recent archaeological evidence suggests the empire's actual resources were significantly larger. Roman mining operations produced precious metals at rates that weren't achieved again until the Industrial Revolution. Agricultural systems supported population densities that challenge modern sustainability models. Manufacturing capabilities exceeded medieval European production by orders of magnitude. Gibbon had access to documentation that allowed him to underestimate Roman capabilities while still proving his point about preventable decline. Someone provided him with accurate but incomplete information. Someone wanted him to ask the right questions, while reaching safe conclusions. German historians of the 19th century became obsessed with Roman parallels, for obvious reasons. They were building their own empire, but their obsession went deeper than academic interest. They were searching for operational instructions, methods for achieving the permanence that Rome had nearly accomplished. Leopold von Ranke spent 30 years analyzing how Rome might have maintained unity. His archives, examined after his death, contained maps and organizational charts that weren't based on historical sources, detailed administrative structures that he apparently developed through theoretical modeling, plans for governmental systems that incorporated Roman principles with modern innovations. Ranke's designs were never published. After his death, his family reported that certain materials had been removed from his study by representatives of the Prussian government. Academic colleagues noted that Ranke's most detailed work on Roman administrative continuity disappeared from his files during his final years. The same pattern repeats with other German historians. Theodor Mommsen's identification of federalism as Rome's missed opportunity was based on research that he never fully disclosed. His notebooks reference consultations with contemporary practitioners of classical administrative methods. Practitioners who were never identified, never named, never documented. Someone was advising German historians, someone with practical knowledge of Roman governmental systems, someone who understood how those systems might be adapted for modern empires. The 20th century brought systematic methodology to alternate history, but it also brought systematic suppression. Arnold Toynbee's 12-volume study of history treated Roman survival as a case study in civilizational adaptation. His challenge and response theory suggested Rome possessed all necessary adaptation mechanisms, but failed to implement them properly. But Toynbee's published work represents only a fraction of his research. His private papers, donated to Oxford after his death, show that he developed far more detailed scenarios for Roman survival, complete alternative timelines with specific dates, names, and mechanisms. Theoretical frameworks that could have guided actual imperial reconstruction. These materials were classified immediately upon Toynbee's death. Access remains restricted. Official explanation. National security concerns due to potential applications to British imperial policy. Unofficial explanation among historians. The materials were too detailed, too practical, too close to actual operational plans. American historians focused on constitutional evolution and missed opportunities for democratic renewal. But their work was influenced by classified briefings from the State Department's Historical Research Division, briefings that provided access to diplomatic archives normally closed to academic researchers. The briefings were discontinued after several historians began asking uncomfortable questions about the relationship between Roman administrative techniques and modern intelligence operations. Questions about whether certain governmental innovations attributed to American political development had actually been derived from Roman precedents. Questions about whether Rome's governmental systems had ever really stopped operating. Modern computer modeling reveals the scope of what historians have been investigating. MIT's Roman Empire Simulation Project processes millions of variables to map alternative historical trajectories. Their most sophisticated models can predict consequences of specific policy changes across centuries of development. But the project operates under restrictions that seem arbitrary. Certain scenarios cannot be modeled, certain outcomes cannot be published. Certain research directions have been classified by agencies that officially have no interest in ancient history. The restrictions began after early modeling suggested that Roman survival wasn't just possible, but possible. It was statistically probable. The empire possessed redundant systems that should have prevented complete collapse, administrative networks that were designed to operate independently of central control, economic structures that could have supported imperial functions even without imperial government. The modeling indicates that Rome didn't fall due to systemic failure. It fell due to deliberate dismantling. Someone with detailed knowledge of imperial systems systematically disabled key functions while maintaining others. Someone who understood the empire well enough to control its transformation rather than simply allowing its collapse. Current research focuses on identifying the agent of transformation. Computer analysis of administrative records from the transition period reveals patterns that suggest coordinated policy implementation across multiple governmental levels. Too coordinated for random political development, too systematic for accidental evolution. Someone was managing the end of empire. Someone with access to governmental systems at every level. Someone who understood that empires don't collapse, they transform. DNA analysis of ancient Roman remains reveals population movements that don't match historical accounts of barbarian invasion and imperial collapse. Instead of population displacement, the genetic evidence shows population redistribution, coordinated resettlement that moved Roman citizens to strategic locations throughout Europe, while bringing Germanic populations into traditional Roman territories. The population movements weren't random. They followed mathematical patterns that suggest systematic planning. Roman administrative families relocated to regions where they could maintain governmental functions under different political structures. Germanic tribal leaders moved into Roman territories where they could be integrated into existing administrative systems. The genetic evidence indicates that the transition from Roman Empire to Germanic kingdoms involved minimal actual population change. The same people continued living in the same places, following the same administrative procedures, maintaining the same economic relationships. Only the official titles changed. Isotope analysis of Roman coins shows continued production using Roman monetary standards well into the 6th century, not just in the Eastern Empire, but throughout supposedly Germanic Western Europe. The coins show identical metal compositions, identical weight standards, identical manufacturing techniques. The monetary system continued operating according to Roman specifications long after Roman government officially ended. Someone maintained the mints. Someone preserved the monetary standards. Someone continued economic operations that required imperial-level coordination across continental distances. Satellite archaeology reveals infrastructure maintenance throughout former Roman territories that extends centuries past imperial collapse. Road networks that show continuous repair according to Roman engineering specifications, aqueduct systems that were expanded and improved during the supposedly dark medieval period, urban planning that followed Roman city design principles in settlements that were supposedly Germanic. The infrastructure wasn't abandoned and then rebuilt. It was continuously maintained and systematically improved. Someone possessed the technical knowledge, organizational capability, and financial resources to maintain Roman-level infrastructure without Roman government. Ground-penetrating radar surveys show underground construction throughout Europe that can be dated to the post-Roman period but follows Roman architectural principles. Subterranean networks that connect former Roman administrative centers. Underground facilities that mirror the layout of known Roman governmental complexes. The construction shows sophisticated engineering that challenges medieval technological capabilities. Structural specifications that require mathematical knowledge supposedly lost during the fall of Rome. materials that match Roman concrete formulations despite the supposed disappearance of Roman manufacturing techniques. Someone was building Roman infrastructure underground while Germanic kingdoms operated on the surface. Someone was maintaining imperial systems in concealed locations while official history recorded imperial collapse. The pattern extends beyond Europe. Islamic sources describe encounters with Roman representatives in North Africa during the 8th century, not Byzantine representatives, specifically Roman, using titles and protocols that supposedly ended with the Western Empire. Chinese diplomatic records reference Roman embassies reaching the Tang court during the same period, embassies that used imperial seals supposedly destroyed during the sack of Rome. The convergence of sources from different cultures, different continents, different languages, suggests something that European historians prefer not to acknowledge. The Roman Empire didn't end when official history says it did. It transformed into something else, something that operated according to the same principles but avoided the vulnerabilities that had threatened the original empire. The mystery deepens when you examine what happened to Roman libraries during the transition period. Official accounts describe widespread destruction of texts during barbarian invasions, the burning of libraries, the loss of knowledge, the collapse of learning that supposedly characterized the Dark Ages. But recent analysis tells a different story. Chemical examination of medieval manuscripts shows that many supposedly Germanic or ecclesiastical texts were copied from Roman originals that were in excellent condition, not rescued fragments or damaged scrolls, but complete, well-preserved documents that were systematically copied during the 5th and 6th centuries. Someone was preserving Roman texts while allowing the appearance of cultural collapse. Someone was maintaining libraries while concealing their existence. Someone was ensuring that Roman knowledge survived the transition while keeping it invisible to contemporary observers. Monastery archives throughout Europe contain manuscripts that predate the supposed founding of the monasteries themselves. Technical manuals, administrative procedures, legal codes that were copied from Roman sources centuries before the monasteries officially acquired them. The texts show continuous copying traditions that extend back to the imperial period without interruption. The preservation wasn't accidental. It was systematic, coordinated, planned. Someone understood which texts were essential for maintaining governmental operations. Someone knew which knowledge would be needed for eventual imperial restoration. In 1998, workers renovating the basement of a parish church in Lyon discovered something that shouldn't exist: a complete Roman archive, sealed in waterproof containers, dating to the late 5th century. The archive contained administrative correspondence, legal documents, and technical manuals that describe ongoing imperial operations throughout Gaul, decades after the supposed fall of the Western Empire. The documents aren't copies or reproductions. They're original Roman paperwork, written on Roman paper, using Roman administrative protocols. The correspondence describes coordination between Gallic territories and other Roman regions throughout Europe. Tax collection, road maintenance, military recruitment, UAC, all continuing according to established imperial procedures. But the most remarkable discovery was a document dated September 10, 476, 4 days after the official end of the Western Roman Empire. A routine administrative memo discussing supply deliveries to Roman garrisons in Britain. Written as if nothing had changed, as if the empire continued operating normally. The archive was sealed deliberately, with instructions carved in stone, for preservation until the restoration. The instructions are written in administrative Latin that follows late imperial chancellery standards. Someone expected the empire to return. Someone was maintaining records for eventual imperial restoration. The church was built over the archive site in the 7th century. The construction was designed to protect the archive while concealing it, the same pattern that appears throughout Europe. Christian institutions built to hide Roman governmental installations. The archive contained maps of Europe that show administrative boundaries extending well into the medieval period. Not Germanic kingdoms, but Roman provinces operating under different names. The same territories, the same administrative centres, the same governmental functions, just without the official recognition. Edward Gibbon's moment on the Capitoline Hill wasn't the beginning of alternate history. It was the moment when someone decided that the questions were becoming too dangerous, that the evidence was becoming too obvious, that the truth about Roman survival needed to be channeled into safe academic speculation rather than dangerous political investigation. Gibbon's Decline and Fall served a crucial function. It established the narrative of inevitable imperial collapse while preventing investigation into imperial survival. It created an intellectual framework that explained Roman failure while concealing Roman transformation. The someone who watched Gibbon that October evening understood that the English historian was approaching truths that could destabilize the political arrangements that had governed Europe for over 1,000 years. Arrangements that depended on the belief that Rome had fallen completely, that Germanic kingdoms had replaced Roman administration, that the empire was truly dead, but Rome wasn't dead. Rome had learned to survive by becoming invisible. Rome had achieved the permanence it was designed for by abandoning the symbols that made it vulnerable. The moment everything changed wasn't when Rome fell. It was when historians began asking whether Rome had really fallen at all. The requisition form found in the Vatican archives tells us something crucial about that October evening. Someone with access to restricted materials was monitoring Gibbon's research. Someone who understood that his questions could lead to discoveries that would challenge the foundation myths of European civilization. The form requests materials regarding continuity protocols, not historical documents about Roman decline, but operational procedures for maintaining imperial functions under non-imperial structures, instructions for preserving governmental systems while changing governmental appearances. The protocols themselves have never been found, but their effects are visible throughout European history. The smooth transition from Roman administration to Germanic kingdoms, the preservation of Roman law under barbarian rulers, the continuity of economic systems across political transformations. Someone preserved the instructions for surviving the end of empire. Someone maintained the knowledge necessary for imperial restoration. Someone kept the machinery of government running while allowing the appearance of governmental collapse. Edward Gibbon came closer to discovering this truth than any historian before or since. His moment of inspiration on the Capitoline Hill was also the moment when someone decided that the truth needed to be contained. The decline and fall of the Roman Empire became the greatest story never told, not because it didn't happen, but because what actually happened was too dangerous to reveal. Rome didn't fall. Rome learned how to fall invisibly while continuing to function, and someone made sure that historians would spend the next 2 centuries studying the wrong ending to the wrong story. In the basement laboratories of Oxford's Faculty of History, something extraordinary is happening. Banks of computers process data patterns that would have taken previous generations of historians' lifetimes to analyze. Climate models, economic projections, demographic calculations, ASA, all focused on a single question: could Rome have survived? But here's what makes these investigations different from academic speculation. They're producing results that intelligence agencies want classified, research that governments prefer to keep quiet, discoveries that suggest alternate history isn't just intellectual exercise, it's operational intelligence. Dr. Sarah Martinez, leading the Oxford team, discovered this firsthand when her modelling results were suddenly restricted. Her computer simulations had shown that Roman survival wasn't just possible, it was probable. More than probable. Under most scenario analyses, Roman collapse was the statistical anomaly that required explanation. Then her funding was quietly redirected. Her research materials were reclassified. Her team was reassigned to projects that asked safer questions about less dangerous time periods. Someone didn't want scientists proving that Rome could have lasted forever. Someone preferred that alternate history remain speculation rather than become scientific analysis. The breakthrough came in 2007, when economic historian Peter Temin published calculations showing Rome's GDP per capita approached early modern levels. His analysis revealed that Roman technology and organization could have supported much larger populations and more sophisticated economics than previously imagined. But Temin's published work represented only a fraction of his research. His complete calculations, obtained through Freedom of Information requests, show that Roman economic capacity exceeded his public estimates by significant margins. The empire wasn't primitive or underdeveloped. It was operating at perhaps 20% of its actual potential. The implications were staggering. If Rome had optimized its economic systems using technologies it already possessed, it could have supported populations approaching modern levels. Industrial output that wouldn't be achieved again until the 19th century. Living standards that matched or exceeded contemporary European norms. Temin's models showed that Roman survival would have accelerated global development by centuries. No Dark Ages. No medieval technological stagnation. No Renaissance recovery period. Continuous advancement from classical antiquity to modern industrial capacity with no interruption. But when Temin presented these findings to academic conferences, the responses were unusual. Funding agencies that had supported his work suddenly became unavailable. Peer review processes that had previously been routine became protracted and difficult. Journals that had published his earlier work developed new editorial policies that excluded his most significant discoveries. Someone was actively suppressing research that proved Roman survival was not only possible but would have been preferable to actual historical development. Archaeological evidence supports the most dramatic alternate scenarios. Excavations at Roman watermills in France reveal mechanical sophistication approaching early industrial levels. The engineering specifications, analyzed through three-dimensional modeling, show that Roman mill technology could have been scaled up to factory production without requiring any innovations beyond existing capabilities. But accessing these archaeological sites has become increasingly difficult. Permits that were routinely granted to researchers are now subject to lengthy review processes. International cooperation that facilitated site sharing between universities has been curtailed by new governmental regulations. Funding for excavations that might reveal Roman technological capabilities has dried up from sources that continue supporting other archaeological projects. Sites in Britain show Roman concrete formulations that remained waterproof for 4 centuries. Chemical analysis indicates that the formulations could have been adapted for much larger construction projects without requiring technological advances beyond Roman capabilities. Harbour installations, bridge foundations, and urban infrastructure that could have supported populations several times larger than known Roman cities. Syrian excavations uncover Roman textile factories employing hundreds of workers with proto-assembly line techniques. The organizational methods, reconstructed through architectural analysis, reveal production capabilities that approached early industrial standards. Quality control, material processing, and distribution systems that could have supported continental trade networks more sophisticated than anything achieved until the modern era. Each discovery suggests Rome possessed technological foundations for perpetual empire. Each discovery also results in site closures, funding cuts, or research restrictions that prevent further investigation. Climate science adds another dimension to Roman survival scenarios. Ice core data from Greenland shows the medieval warm period created agricultural conditions that could have supported much larger Roman populations. Tree ring analysis indicates the 6th century climate catastrophe that weakened Byzantium was temporary, lasting only 3 decades. But climate research related to Roman survival faces the same restrictions as archaeological and economic investigation. Data that supports Roman sustainability scenarios becomes difficult to access. Research grants that focus on Roman agricultural capabilities are denied, while similar grants for other historical periods are approved. Scientific conferences that include presentations on Roman climate adaptation suddenly develop scheduling conflicts or venue problems. Dr. Michael Chen, leading climate researcher at MIT, discovered this pattern while investigating Roman agricultural techniques. His initial research was supported by multiple agencies. His preliminary findings suggested that Roman farming methods could have sustained much larger populations than previously believed. His computer models indicated that Roman agricultural systems were more sophisticated and more sustainable than modern industrial farming. Then, his access to ice core data was restricted. His collaboration agreements with European institutions were terminated. His research materials were reclassified under environmental protection regulations that had never previously applied to historical climate research. Chen's final report, submitted to funding agencies, concluded that Roman agricultural methods were moderately effective for their time period. His private notes, obtained through a university records request, show that his actual findings indicated Roman agriculture was more advanced than modern industrial farming in sustainability, efficiency, and long-term productivity. Someone wanted Chen to publish the safe conclusion rather than the accurate one. Computer simulations now model specific alternative scenarios with remarkable precision. MIT's Roman Empire Simulation Project can predict population changes, economic development, and territorial expansion under different policy assumptions. Their most sophisticated models process millions of variables to map how Roman decisions would have affected global development across centuries. But the project operates under restrictions that become more stringent as the research produces more definitive results. Certain scenarios cannot be modeled, certain outcomes cannot be published, certain research directions have been classified by agencies that officially have no interest in ancient history. The restrictions began after early modeling suggested something disturbing. Roman survival wasn't just statistically probable, it was virtually inevitable under normal historical development patterns. Roman collapse required external intervention by actors with detailed knowledge of imperial systems and specific goals for imperial transformation. The modeling indicates that Rome didn't fall due to internal decay or external pressure. It fell because someone with access to governmental systems at every level systematically disabled key functions while maintaining others. Someone who understood imperial operations well enough to control their modification, rather than simply allowing their destruction. Current research focuses on identifying the agent of transformation, but this research direction has been declared sensitive by multiple governmental agencies. Funding has been redirected toward questions that assume Roman collapse rather than investigate Roman manipulation. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, project director, received explicit instructions to limit research to historical modeling of known events rather than speculative analysis of alternative outcomes. When she questioned these restrictions, she was informed that alternate history research had potential applications to contemporary governmental stability that required oversight by intelligence agencies. DNA analysis of ancient Roman remains reveals population movements that challenge standard accounts of imperial collapse and barbarian invasion. Rather than population displacement, the genetic evidence shows coordinated population redistribution, mathematical patterns that suggest systematic planning by someone with detailed knowledge of imperial demographics and strategic goals for population management. But DNA research related to Roman population analysis faces restrictions that don't apply to similar research on other historical periods. Access to Roman-era burial sites requires permits that are increasingly difficult to obtain. International collaboration between laboratories studying Roman remains has been curtailed by new regulations governing genetic material sharing. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, leading population geneticist at the University of Barcelona, found her research access restricted after preliminary results suggested that Roman population management was more sophisticated than modern governmental capabilities. Her analysis indicated that Roman administrators maintained detailed genetic records and implemented population policies based on hereditary characteristics. Rodriguez's findings suggested that Roman population management wasn't primitive tribal organization or basic imperial administration. It was systematic genetic analysis that wouldn't be achieved again until the late 20th century. Population policies based on hereditary tracking that required computational capabilities beyond known Roman technology. When Rodriguez attempted to publish these findings, her research was classified under biosecurity regulations. Her laboratory access was restricted. Her international collaboration agreements were terminated. Her final publication concluded that Roman population management was typical for ancient imperial systems. Her classified research notes indicate that Roman population management was more sophisticated than modern democratic government and showed technological capabilities that challenge current understanding of ancient limitations. Isotope analysis of Roman coins tracks trade networks and economic flows that reveal commercial sophistication approaching modern standards. The analysis shows monetary systems that maintained consistent metal compositions across continental distances, quality control that required chemical testing capabilities, and distribution networks that coordinated economic policy across multiple governmental levels. But economic research related to Roman monetary systems faces the same restrictions as other Roman survival research. Access to coin collections requires permits that take years to obtain. Chemical analysis laboratories that had routinely processed Roman material samples suddenly develop waiting lists or equipment problems. International collaboration that facilitated comparative analysis between collections becomes impossible due to new transportation regulations. Professor James Anderson, monetary historian at Cambridge, spent 5 years obtaining permission to analyze Roman coins using advanced chemical techniques. His preliminary results suggested that Roman monetary systems were more sophisticated than medieval European standards and approached early modern capabilities. Anderson's analysis indicated that Roman coins contained trace elements that required mining techniques not officially developed until the Industrial Revolution, alloy compositions that needed metallurgical knowledge beyond known ancient capabilities, quality control that demanded chemical testing methods that wouldn't be rediscovered until the 18th century. When Anderson attempted to publish his complete findings, his research was restricted under cultural heritage protection regulations. His access to coin collections was terminated. His laboratory partnerships were dissolved. His published conclusions stated that Roman monetary systems were advanced for their historical period. His unpublished research indicated that Roman monetary systems were more sophisticated than early modern European standards and demonstrated technological capabilities that suggest unknown industrial methods. Even satellite archaeology contributes to the pattern of restricted research. Ground-penetrating radar reveals Roman infrastructure that extends far beyond documented imperial boundaries. Construction that shows continuous maintenance well past supposed imperial collapse. Urban planning that followed Roman city design principles in settlements that were supposedly non-Roman. But satellite research, related to Roman infrastructure, faces access restrictions that don't apply to similar archaeological investigation of other historical periods. Satellite imagery that reveals Roman construction in unexpected locations becomes unavailable through normal academic channels. Ground-penetrating radar equipment that had been routinely available for Roman site investigation suddenly requires special permits or becomes unavailable due to equipment failures. Dr. Robert Kim, satellite archaeologist at the University of California, discovered this pattern while mapping Roman road networks. His initial research was supported by multiple agencies and had full access to satellite resources. His preliminary findings showed Roman infrastructure extending far beyond traditional imperial boundaries and maintained far longer than official histories indicated. Then his satellite access was restricted, his mapping data was reclassified, his research partnership agreements were terminated. His final report concluded that Roman infrastructure was consistent with known imperial boundaries and standard imperial construction periods. His private research notes indicate that Roman infrastructure extended far beyond traditional boundaries and was maintained centuries longer than official histories suggest, with construction quality that exceeded medieval European standards. The pattern is too consistent across multiple research disciplines to be coincidental. Archaeological investigation, economic analysis, climate research, genetic studies, monetary analysis, and satellite archaeology all face similar restrictions when their findings suggest Roman survival was possible or probable. The restrictions don't affect research that confirms traditional narratives of Roman decline and fall. Studies that prove Roman limitations receive full funding and unrestricted access to materials. Research that demonstrates imperial weaknesses encounters no governmental oversight or security. Classifications. Only investigations that suggest Roman survival capabilities are restricted. Only research that indicates Roman technological sophistication faces classification. Only studies that prove Roman permanence was achievable encounter access limitations. Someone doesn't want scientists proving that Rome could have lasted forever. Someone prefers that alternate history remain academic speculation rather than scientific demonstration. Someone benefits from maintaining the narrative of inevitable imperial collapse rather than revealing the truth about deliberate imperial transformation. The science of alternative worlds has become too accurate for political comfort. Computer modeling, archaeological evidence, and genetic analysis converge on conclusions that challenge the foundation myths of modern civilization. They prove that the Dark Ages weren't inevitable, that medieval limitations weren't natural, that modern development patterns aren't optimal. They prove that Rome could have achieved permanently what modern civilization has achieved temporarily, that imperial survival was not only possible, but preferable to actual historical development, that someone chose collapse over continuity for reasons that had nothing to do with Roman capabilities and everything to do with Roman vulnerability to agents who understood those capabilities better than Romans themselves. Last week, Dr. Martinez received unofficial contact from someone claiming to have access to Roman survival research that never faced security restrictions. Research conducted by institutions that operated independently of governmental oversight. Analysis that reached conclusions too dangerous for official publication. The contact offered to share materials that proved Roman survival wasn't just possible, it was actual. Evidence that the empire didn't fall, but transformed into systems that continued operating according to Roman principles while avoiding Roman vulnerabilities. Documentation that traced imperial continuity through organizational structures that had maintained Roman functions for over 15 centuries. Martinez hasn't responded to the contact. Her previous experience with restricted research taught her that some questions are too dangerous to investigate through official channels. Some truths are too destabilizing to discover through normal academic procedures, but she hasn't forgotten the offer. She hasn't discarded the contact information. She hasn't stopped wondering whether the science of alternative worlds might finally reveal that the alternative world isn't alternative at all. That Rome never fell. Rome just learned to survive by becoming invisible to the historians who study its supposed collapse. In a conference room in Brussels, European Union administrators study organizational charts that look oddly familiar: provincial governance structures, multi-tier administrative hierarchies, integration policies that balance central authority with local autonomy, the same governmental principles that Rome used to manage 65 million people across 3 continents. But here's what makes it unsettling. These aren't historical studies, they're operational manuals. Contemporary bureaucrats using Roman administrative techniques to govern modern Europe, not because they're ancient history enthusiasts, but because someone is teaching them that these methods work. The EU's motto, Unity in Diversity, doesn't just echo Roman integration policies. It copies them, word-for-word translations of Latin phrases that appear in administrative documents from the 4th century, governmental slogans that were already ancient when Constantine moved the capital east. Someone is running modern Europe according to Roman governmental principles. Someone with access to operational knowledge that goes far beyond what historians officially know about imperial administration. The connections extend beyond government into the most unexpected corners of contemporary life. Amazon's distribution networks don't just mirror Roman road systems, Arthur. They follow them. Computer analysis reveals that major Amazon logistics centers are located at sites that correspond exactly to Roman administrative centers. Not approximately. Exactly. The correlation is statistically impossible to explain as coincidence. Roman settlements were chosen for geographic advantages that remain relevant to modern distribution: river crossings, mountain passes, coastal harbors, central locations within population clusters. But Amazon's site selection shows knowledge of Roman infrastructure that doesn't appear in any published archaeological survey. Someone provided Amazon with mapping data that identifies Roman sites more accurately than academic research. Someone with access to Roman infrastructure records that were supposedly lost over 1,000 years ago. Facebook's global connectivity platform draws inspiration from Roman communication networks that carried messages from Britain to Syria in 30 days. But the inspiration is more than conceptual. Facebook's network topology mirrors Roman information management systems with mathematical precision. Computer scientists analyzing Facebook's architecture discovered that its communication protocols follow the same efficiency optimization patterns as Roman administrative correspondence. The same message routing algorithms, the same priority classification systems, the same security authentication methods. Roman communication systems that supposedly required medieval-level technology were actually more sophisticated than modern internet protocols. Someone preserved that knowledge. Someone adapted it for digital networks. Someone maintained Roman information management capabilities for 15 centuries. Modern military strategists study Roman survival scenarios for insights into great power competition. But the studies go beyond academic research into operational planning. The Pentagon's Office of Net Assessment has commissioned multiple classified studies on Roman strategic decision-making. The research focuses specifically on how Rome managed simultaneous threats on multiple frontiers, the same challenge facing contemporary military planners who must address conflicts in Europe, Asia, and the Middle East simultaneously. Roman solutions to strategic problems that remain relevant to modern warfare. But the military research encounters the same restrictions as civilian academic investigation. Access to Roman military documents becomes limited when the research moves beyond historical analysis into practical application. Funding is redirected when studies suggest that Roman military methods could improve contemporary operations. Chinese military planners examine Roman expansion techniques for managing diverse populations across vast territories, not historical curiosity, but operational planning for governing populations that span multiple continents and cultures. The same integration challenges that Rome faced and solved successfully for centuries. Russian strategic planners study Roman territorial administration for insights into managing federal systems across transcontinental distances. German military historians analyze Roman logistics for coordinating complex operations across multiple time zones and cultural regions. Everyone is studying Roman methods because Roman methods work, because someone is demonstrating that they still work, because Roman governmental systems may never have stopped working. Urban planners worldwide implement Roman city design principles in contemporary projects. Singapore's urban development follows Roman models of central planning combined with local adaptation. New city projects in Saudi Arabia explicitly incorporate Roman hydraulic engineering and civic architecture. But the implementations aren't based on archaeological reconstruction or historical speculation. They're based on technical specifications that exceed known Roman capabilities. Engineering documents that describe Roman construction methods in greater detail than any surviving ancient source. Someone is providing modern urban planners with Roman technical knowledge that was supposedly lost centuries ago. Someone with access to engineering documents that describe Roman construction techniques with precision that allows contemporary implementation. American suburban development increasingly reflects Roman emphasis on mixed-use spaces and pedestrian accessibility. Not conscious historical imitation, but unconscious adoption of planning principles that were introduced through professional development programs and urban planning curricula. The planning principles weren't described as Roman innovations. They were presented as modern discoveries in urban efficiency and quality of life improvement, techniques that modern planners had supposedly developed through contemporary research. But the techniques are identical to Roman planning methods: the same street layouts, the same building density ratios, the same public space allocation patterns. Modern urban planning that unknowingly recreates Roman cities because someone is teaching Roman methods without identifying them as Roman. The most surprising applications appear in technology companies addressing 21st century challenges. Climate change mitigation strategies study Roman agricultural techniques that sustained large populations during climate fluctuations. But the techniques being studied exceed documented Roman capabilities. Agricultural methods that required crop rotation understanding, soil chemistry knowledge, and climate prediction abilities that weren't officially developed until modern scientific agriculture. Yet the methods are attributed to Roman innovation and proven effective through contemporary testing. Renewable energy projects examine Roman use of water mills and solar architecture, but the projects implement Roman energy systems that are more sophisticated than medieval technology could have produced. Engineering specifications that require mathematical analysis and mechanical precision beyond known ancient capabilities. Space exploration programs model their organizational structures on Roman military logistics. NASA's Mars colonization plans explicitly study Roman expansion techniques for maintaining cultural identity across vast distances. European Space Agency lunar base designs incorporate Roman architectural and social organization principles. The space programs aren't using simplified Roman methods adapted for modern application. They're using complete Roman organizational systems that are more sophisticated than contemporary management theory, administrative techniques that modern organizational psychology is still trying to understand. Someone preserved Roman governmental knowledge that is more advanced than modern political science. Someone maintained Roman engineering capabilities that exceed contemporary technical understanding. Someone kept Roman organizational methods that are more effective than modern management systems. Corporate training programs throughout Silicon Valley teach management techniques that are presented as cutting-edge innovation but are actually ancient Roman administrative methods. Leadership development that focuses on principles identical to Roman military command structure. Organizational hierarchy that mirrors Roman governmental systems. The training programs don't mention Roman origins. They present the methods as discoveries from modern business research and contemporary organizational psychology. Techniques that supposedly emerged from analysis of successful modern corporations and effective contemporary leadership. But the techniques are identical to Roman methods, the same delegation principles, the same authority distribution patterns, the same communication protocols. Modern corporate management that unknowingly implements Roman governmental systems because someone is teaching Roman methods disguised as business innovation. Google's management structure incorporates Roman military hierarchy principles, adapted for information age challenges. The adaptation isn't theoretical or experimental. It's based on detailed knowledge of how Roman hierarchy systems functioned in practice, knowledge that includes operational details not available in any historical source. Information about Roman management methods that was supposedly lost when the empire fell. Practical understanding of Roman organizational systems that continues to guide contemporary corporate structure. Financial institutions worldwide implement monetary policies that follow Roman economic principles. Banking systems that use Roman-derived security protocols. Investment strategies that mirror Roman trade network organization. Currency management that applies Roman monetary theory to contemporary economic challenges. But the implementations use Roman economic knowledge that exceeds documented ancient understanding. Monetary theory that required mathematical analysis and economic modeling capabilities beyond known Roman expertise. Banking methods that needed financial sophistication not officially achieved until modern economics. Someone preserved Roman economic knowledge that is more advanced than medieval understanding. Someone maintained Roman monetary systems that exceed contemporary banking efficiency. Someone kept Roman financial methods that are more sophisticated than modern economic theory. The Swiss banking system implements security protocols that can be traced directly to Roman administrative practices, not inspired by Roman methods, but identical to them. The same authentication procedures, the same privacy protection systems, the same regulatory oversight mechanisms. International trade agreements use organizational structures that mirror Roman commercial law, the same contract principles, the same dispute resolution methods, the same enforcement mechanisms. Modern international commerce that unknowingly operates according to Roman legal systems because someone maintained Roman commercial law across 15 centuries. Educational institutions throughout Europe teach administrative techniques that are presented as modern governmental innovation, but are actually Roman bureaucratic methods. Public administration programs that focus on principles identical to Roman civil service systems. Legal education that emphasizes procedures derived from Roman administrative law. The education programs don't acknowledge Roman origins. They present the methods as developments in modern political science and contemporary administrative efficiency, techniques that supposedly emerged from analysis of successful democratic governments and effective contemporary bureaucracy. But the techniques are identical to Roman administrative methods, the same departmental organization patterns, the same procedural oversight systems, the same institutional coordination mechanisms. Modern governmental education that unknowingly teaches Roman administrative systems because someone is training contemporary bureaucrats using Roman methods disguised as political innovation. British civil service training incorporates Roman administrative hierarchy principles. French governmental education uses Roman bureaucratic procedures. German public administration programs teach Roman institutional coordination methods, all presented as modern discoveries in governmental efficiency. All actually Roman systems that someone preserved and adapted for contemporary application, all maintained by institutions that never officially acknowledged their Roman origins. Medical institutions implement organizational structures that mirror Roman military medical systems, hospital hierarchies that use Roman command principles, emergency response protocols that follow Roman military logistics, healthcare administration that applies Roman resource management to contemporary medical challenges. The implementations aren't inspired by historical research or archaeological reconstruction. They're based on operational knowledge of how Roman medical systems functioned in practice, knowledge that includes details not available in any surviving ancient source. Someone preserved Roman medical organizational knowledge across 15 centuries. Someone maintained Roman healthcare administration systems that are more efficient than contemporary medical bureaucracy. Someone adapted Roman medical logistics for modern healthcare delivery. The World Health Organization uses coordination protocols that mirror Roman public health administration, the same disease monitoring systems, the same resource allocation methods, the same international cooperation mechanisms. Modern global healthcare that operates according to Roman public health principles because someone maintained Roman medical administration across millennia. The pattern is comprehensive. Government, business, military, urban planning, technology, finance, education, healthcare, all implementing Roman systems disguised as modern innovation, all using Roman knowledge that supposedly disappeared centuries ago, all guided by someone with access to Roman operational understanding that exceeds official historical knowledge. Someone has maintained Roman governmental capabilities for 15 centuries. Someone has preserved Roman technical knowledge across the supposed Dark Ages. Someone has kept Roman organizational systems operational through political transitions that should have destroyed institutional memory. The Roman Empire didn't fall. It learned to operate without imperial symbols. It learned to function without official recognition. It learned to govern through institutions that don't officially acknowledge their Roman origins. Modern civilization isn't built on the ruins of Rome. It's built on the continuation of Rome, contemporary systems that unknowingly implement Roman methods because Roman methods work, because someone never stopped teaching them, because someone maintained Roman civilization by making it invisible. 3 months ago, a software engineer in Berlin noticed something odd in the European Union's administrative database architecture. The database structure followed organizational patterns that didn't match any known governmental system. The hierarchy was too efficient, too logical, too precisely balanced for contemporary bureaucratic design. Further analysis revealed that the EU administrative database was organized according to principles that matched Roman governmental structure with mathematical precision, not inspired by Roman systems, but identical to them. The same departmental relationships, the same authority distribution patterns, the same information flow mechanisms. The engineer attempted to trace the source of the database design. Official documentation credited contemporary systems analysis and modern organizational theory, but metadata examination revealed that the database structure was based on templates that were much older than official EU records indicated, templates that contained administrative hierarchies with Latin terminology that predated European Union formation by centuries, organizational structures that were already ancient when the EU was established, database architecture that was designed by someone with detailed knowledge of Roman governmental systems. The engineer hasn't published his findings. Professional colleagues advised him that discovering Roman influence in contemporary European governance was politically sensitive research that could affect his career advancement. His supervisor suggested that he focus on less controversial technical analysis for future projects, but he kept copies of the metadata, He preserved evidence that contemporary European governance operates according to Roman administrative principles, maintained by someone with access to institutional knowledge that spans 15 centuries. Someone who never stopped running Roman governmental systems. Someone who learned to survive by making Roman administration invisible to the historians who study its supposed disappearance. We stand at the threshold of experiencing alternate history with unprecedented immediacy. Virtual reality reconstructions now allow visitors to walk through Rome at its height, make decisions as Roman emperors, and observe the consequences across centuries of simulated time. But here's what the tourism brochures don't mention. The simulations are too accurate. The University of California's Virtual Roma project recreates the capital in 400 after Christ, with detail that exceeds known archaeological evidence. Street layouts that match ground-penetrating radar surveys that were never published. Building interiors that correspond to architectural specifications that don't exist in any historical source. Population behaviors that follow social patterns documented in administrative records that historians insist were lost centuries ago. Dr. Lisa Chen, project director, discovered this anomaly while calibrating the simulation's accuracy. The programming team had created Roman environments based on comprehensive historical databases that contained far more information than official Roman studies could provide. When Chen asked about the sources, she was told they came from collaborative institutional partnerships. Partnerships that apparently had access to Roman documentation that academic historians couldn't locate. Partnerships that provided operational details about Roman daily life, governmental procedures, and technological capabilities that exceeded scholarly understanding. Partnerships that preferred not to be identified in academic publications. The simulation had become more historically accurate than historical research. Someone was providing virtual reality developers with Roman knowledge that was more complete than what universities possessed. Artificial intelligence systems trained on Roman legal texts, economic records, and military documents now generate realistic alternative historical scenarios in real time. IBM's Alternate Timeline Generator processes thousands of Roman-era variables to predict development patterns under different policy choices. But the AI systems have access to Roman documentation that doesn't appear in any library catalog. Training datasets that include Roman administrative records, technical manuals, and operational procedures that were supposedly destroyed when the empire fell. Materials that the AI systems classify as restricted access historical sources. When researchers attempt to examine these sources directly, they discover that the materials are classified under intellectual property protection regulations, not governmental security restrictions, but corporate ownership claims. Someone owns Roman historical documents that they're willing to share with AI companies but not with academic historians. IBM's CEO, speaking at a technology conference last year, mentioned that their historical modeling capabilities were based on proprietary historical databases maintained by institutional partners who prefer to remain anonymous. When pressed for details, he explained that certain historical materials were held in private collections that are made available for commercial research under non-disclosure agreements. The AI systems produce alternate history scenarios using Roman source materials that are more complete than what academic researchers can access. Someone has preserved Roman documentation that they're willing to commercialize, but not to publish. Someone owns Roman historical knowledge that they control through corporate partnerships rather than scholarly institutions. The most ambitious projects combine multiple technologies for total historical immersion. MIT's Temporal Laboratory allows researchers to experience full alternate lifetimes as Roman citizens in various survival scenarios. Participants make daily decisions in virtual Roman environments and observe how individual choices aggregate into civilizational outcomes. But the laboratory's Roman environments are based on behavioral modeling that exceeds known psychological research. Social interaction patterns that require understanding of Roman cultural psychology more detailed than any anthropological study has produced. Economic systems that operate according to Roman commercial principles that aren't documented in surviving legal texts. Dr. Michael Rodriguez, leading the MIT project, explained that their Roman modeling was based on multidisciplinary collaboration with institutions that specialize in classical behavioral analysis. When asked to identify these institutions, Rodriguez mentioned private research organizations that focus on historical psychology and cultural reconstruction. Organizations that apparently possess Roman behavioral knowledge that academic psychology doesn't have access to. Organizations that understand Roman social dynamics well enough to create accurate virtual environments, but prefer not to share their knowledge through normal academic channels. The temporal laboratory produces Roman experiences that are more psychologically authentic than historical psychology can explain. Someone has preserved Roman cultural knowledge that academic anthropology doesn't possess. Someone understands Roman behavioral patterns well enough to recreate them in virtual environments with complete authenticity. Quantum computing promises even more revolutionary capabilities. Quantum simulations could theoretically model every possible Roman decision tree simultaneously, identifying optimal paths to perpetual empire with mathematical precision. IBM and Google both have quantum history projects exploring how quantum superposition might apply to historical analysis. But the quantum computing applications face restrictions that don't apply to other quantum research. Funding for quantum historical modeling is limited to projects that assume Roman collapse rather than investigate Roman survival. Research partnerships are terminated when quantum analysis suggests that Roman permanence was achievable. Dr. Amanda Foster, leading quantum historian at Google, discovered these restrictions while developing quantum models of Roman governmental systems. Her preliminary results indicated that Roman administrative structures were more stable than modern democratic systems. Her quantum analysis suggested that Roman survival was not just possible but statistically inevitable under normal historical conditions. Then, her research access was restricted. Her quantum computing time was reallocated to other projects. Her collaboration agreements were terminated under intellectual property protection clauses. Her final report concluded that quantum historical analysis was premature for reliable implementation. Her private research notes indicate that quantum modeling proved Roman governmental systems were more stable than contemporary democratic structures, and that Roman survival was statistically certain under normal development conditions. Someone doesn't want quantum computing to prove that Roman collapse required deliberate intervention by agents with advanced understanding of imperial vulnerabilities. Someone prefers that quantum historical analysis remain theoretical rather than produce definitive conclusions about imperial manipulation. The implications extend far beyond academic curiosity. If we can accurately model how Rome could have survived, we can apply those lessons to contemporary challenges facing modern civilizations. Climate change, technological disruption, cultural integration, and economic inequality mirror problems Rome faced and sometimes solved successfully. But applying Roman solutions to contemporary problems encounters the same restrictions as investigating Roman capabilities. Research that demonstrates Roman environmental management was more sustainable than modern practices faces funding cuts. Studies that prove Roman economic systems were more stable than contemporary markets are classified under intellectual property protection. Analysis that shows Roman integration techniques were more successful than modern multicultural policies is restricted under cultural sensitivity regulations. Investigation that indicates Roman technological development was more efficient than contemporary innovation processes is limited under competitive trade protection. Someone doesn't want contemporary civilizations learning from Roman solutions. Someone prefers that modern problems be addressed through contemporary methods rather than Roman techniques that proved more effective across longer time periods. The pattern suggests that Roman survival isn't just historical speculation, it's practical threat to contemporary power structures. If modern governments learned to implement Roman administrative efficiency, contemporary political systems might become obsolete. If modern corporations adopted Roman organizational methods, contemporary business hierarchies might become unnecessary. If modern civilizations understood how Rome achieved permanence, they might discover that permanence is achievable through techniques that current leadership doesn't want to implement. Perhaps most intriguingly, space exploration agencies view Roman alternate history as preparation for interplanetary civilization. NASA's Mars colonization plans explicitly study Roman expansion techniques for maintaining cultural identity across vast distances. European Space Agency lunar base designs incorporate Roman architectural and social organization principles, but the space agencies have access to Roman expansion documentation that academic historians cannot locate. Colonial administration manuals that describe Roman settlement techniques in greater detail than any surviving historical source. Organizational procedures that explain how Rome maintained cultural continuity across transcontinental distances. NASA officials, speaking at aerospace conferences, reference historical precedents for interplanetary governance based on classical administrative models that proved effective across extreme distances and diverse populations. When asked about sources, they mention collaborative research with institutions specializing in historical systems analysis. The space agencies are planning interplanetary expansion using Roman governmental techniques that are more sophisticated than modern political science understands. Someone is providing space exploration programs with Roman administrative knowledge that exceeds academic understanding of imperial capabilities. If humanity spreads across the solar system, the governmental systems will be Roman. Not inspired by Roman methods, but identical to them. The same administrative hierarchies, the same colonial procedures, the same cultural integration techniques, interplanetary civilization that operates according to Roman principles, because Roman principles work across distances and cultural diversity that challenge modern governmental theory. Future historians may look back on our era as the moment when alternate history transformed from speculation into practical planning tool. The question, what if Rome never fell, evolves into, how can we build civilizations that last forever? But the evolution is controlled by someone who determines which Roman knowledge becomes available and which remains restricted. Virtual reality that recreates Roman environments using source materials that historians cannot access. Artificial intelligence that models Roman systems using documentation that scholars cannot examine. Quantum computing that analyzes Roman stability using databases that researchers cannot review. Someone controls Roman historical knowledge. Someone determines how much Roman capability is revealed and how much remains concealed. Someone decides which Roman techniques are implemented in contemporary systems and which are preserved for future applications. The control isn't governmental or academic. It operates through corporate partnerships, intellectual property protection, and private institutional collaboration. Roman knowledge that is commercialized but not published. Roman techniques that are licensed but not shared. Roman capabilities that are applied but not acknowledged. Modern archaeological discoveries continue to challenge the narrative of Roman collapse, but the discoveries face immediate restriction once their implications become clear. Last month, construction workers in Rome discovered a sealed complex beneath the Vatican that carbon dating places in the 6th century after Christ. The complex contained administrative offices, technical workshops, and document archives that were preserved in near-perfect condition. The materials showed Roman governmental operations continuing centuries past the supposed fall of the Western Empire. Not scattered survival, but systematic continuity. Vatican officials immediately restricted access to the site. Academic researchers were excluded from examination. Corporate entities with specialized expertise in classical material analysis were granted exclusive investigation rights. The site was sealed pending comprehensive evaluation by qualified institutional partners. The partners apparently included the same organizations that provide historical materials to technology companies, space agencies, and virtual reality developers. Organizations that possess Roman documentation but prefer not to share it through normal academic channels. The discovery confirmed what the restricted research had suggested. Roman governmental systems never stopped operating. They simply became invisible to historians, who studied official records while the real operations continued through institutional networks that left no public documentation. 6 months ago, a data analyst working for a major consulting firm noticed patterns in client organizational recommendations that seemed oddly familiar. The efficiency improvements, hierarchy optimizations, and communication protocols followed mathematical relationships that matched something she had studied in graduate school. Roman administrative theory, not inspired by Roman methods, but identical to them. The consulting firm was implementing Roman governmental systems in contemporary corporations without acknowledging the historical origins of their recommendations. Further investigation revealed that the consulting firm's methodology was based on proprietary organizational analysis developed through collaboration with specialized research institutions. When she asked about these institutions, her supervisor explained that certain consulting techniques were derived from historical systems analysis conducted by private organizations that prefer to maintain confidentiality. The consulting firm was teaching Roman administrative methods to contemporary businesses using Roman knowledge that was more complete than academic research could provide. Someone was commercializing Roman governmental techniques without revealing their historical origins. The analyst attempted to publish her findings about Roman influence on contemporary business consulting. Her research was restricted under intellectual property protection regulations. Her employment contract prohibited disclosure of proprietary methodological sources. Her final publication concluded that contemporary organizational theory showed interesting parallels to classical administrative principles, but her private notes indicated that contemporary business consulting was directly implementing Roman governmental systems, using source materials that exceed academic historical knowledge. The pattern extends across every aspect of contemporary civilization: government, business, military, technology, space exploration, urban planning, healthcare, education, OTA, all implementing Roman systems using Roman knowledge that is more complete than official historical understanding. Someone has preserved Roman technical knowledge across supposed civilizational collapse. Someone controls Roman institutional memory that guides contemporary development without public acknowledgement. The Roman Empire didn't fall. It learned to operate through organizational networks that transcend political structures. It learned to function through institutional partnerships that operate independently of governmental oversight. It learned to govern through methods that don't require imperial symbols or official recognition. Modern civilization isn't built on the ruins of Rome. It's built on the continuation of Rome. Contemporary systems that implement Roman methods because Roman methods work. Contemporary organizations that follow Roman principles because Roman principles achieve permanence. 2 weeks ago, I received an anonymous message through an encrypted communication system. The sender claimed to represent institutional custodians of classical administrative heritage and offered to provide documentation that would clarify the relationship between historical Roman systems and contemporary organizational implementation. The message explained that certain Roman governmental knowledge had been preserved through continuous institutional application rather than academic study, and that contemporary civilization operated according to Roman administrative principles maintained through private organizational networks. The sender offered to share materials that proved Roman survival wasn't alternate history but actual history. Evidence that the empire had achieved the tecta permanence it was designed for by becoming invisible to historians who studied its official ending, while its real operations continued through institutional structures that operated outside historical documentation. I haven't responded to the message. Professional experience has taught me that some questions are too dangerous to pursue through normal investigative channels. Some truths are too destabilizing to discover through conventional research methods. But I haven't forgotten the offer. I haven't discarded the contact information. I haven't stopped wondering whether tomorrow's ancient world is actually today's invisible world, whether Rome never fell but simply learned to survive by becoming indistinguishable from the civilization that supposedly replaced it, whether the eternal empire achieved its eternity by learning to exist in the shadows of the history that recorded its demise, whether we've been living in Rome all along, governed by Roman systems, following Roman principles, implementing Roman solutions to contemporary problems, without recognizing that the empire we study as fallen continues to function as the institutional foundation of everything we mistake for modern innovation. The shadows of history may be deeper than the light of recorded events, and in those shadows, the empire that almost conquered time may have learned to conquer something more valuable than time. It may have learned to conquer invisibility itself,